Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Album Fight Club. I would call it season 2, but it's not like we're really concerned with seasons here. And of course, it's another sidebar with Mike, because even in the new year of 2024, after taking some time off, Cody still will not do one of these for whatever reason. Um, I don't entirely know why, but Cody just apparently can't come up with a topic that interests him enough to do one of these. But I keep finding topics to do, and I keep buying vinyl, so it never is an ending circle for me. Um, yes, we were taking a little bit of time off. We have new episode lineups that we're looking at, and we'll do one soon. But it's been about like a month now since we recorded our last one, so I figured I would come on here and do a little short sidebar, just something to entertain the listeners, although the sidebars aren't necessarily the big draw of this podcast. And even then, we're not hitting hundreds of people at this point. So it doesn't matter really what we do. But I like to hear myself talk apparently. So what I have today is another sidebar. It's another ranking like I've done before. It's also a display of the vinyl I have for these various groups in question. And for this one, it is going to be Periphery, one of my favorite bands of the last decade. Um, I would say 15 years as opposed to decade at this point, because they really started in the 2010s and then on. But this is actually a band that I was at the epicenter of when they even first started touring and releasing their first album. I actually became very familiar with the band when around the time of the Icarus EP, and then from then on, just like became super immersed in their work. I was there for every album drop except Periphery 1. I saw them on tour when they were touring the Icarus EP and Periphery 1. So, I mean, I saw one of their early shows when they were a true Periphery collective. Obviously, if you don't know, Misha Mansour, otherwise known as Bulb, was for many years doing his own music, but then he finally assembled a band under the name Periphery. And so they started releasing albums and touring. And I mean, like I said, I've known them and been familiar with their music really since their first record. I know I wasn't there for the release of their first record, but shortly thereafter, they released Icarus EP, and then from then on, that's when I was a fan of the band. And at one time, especially in late high school, like junior, senior year, Periphery was another one of my favorite bands, which I know I've said that a bunch. I mean, at one point, Metallica was my favorite. Periphery was my favorite. I've got so many favorite bands at this point, and I still love their music a lot. What I like is that they consistently release music, unlike some other bands I've talked about on this podcast, notably Contortionists, who have been silent for like it feels like 6 years at this point. Periphery literally just released a record last year, one that I will talk about. Um, but yeah, I'm a big fan of the group. I've loved a lot of their stuff. And so I just felt I would talk about it and showcase the vinyl, which they just recently repressed all of their vinyl except P5, because P5 is still in stock. But everything from the first album all the way to Periphery 4, they have repressed, and I was able to snag all of them. I don't want to talk about how much money it cost me, but it's cool to have pretty much everything. The only vinyl I do not have at this point is Periphery 5. I just never really got it when it came out for whatever reason. And then when I had the opportunity to buy all of these vinyls, I didn't think about putting Periphery 5 with them for whatever reason. So I have all of them except Periphery 5. So when I talk about Periphery 5, I will not be hoisting any vinyl in front of me, simply because I just don't have it. But I do like P5 a lot. I would love to own it someday, hopefully someday soon. So we're going to do what we've done on all my sidebars, which is I will go through each one and rank them in terms of which one I like the most from their whole catalog. Before that, however, I do want to talk about the ones that I'm not going to quite include in the list. They do have two projects that are not studio albums. They were recorded in studio, but it's not quite your generic studio album idea. Except, well, let's just talk about the first one. The first I want to talk about is Periphery's Clear project. Um, I technically it is a studio album, but technically it's not. So if you don't know, Periphery Clear was a project that took place between the release of Periphery 2 and Juggernaut, if I'm not mistaken, and basically every single member of the band fronted their own recording of their own song. So like they were in charge of writing the lyrics, they were in charge of getting the musical idea behind it. And so what you have here is studio material from Periphery, but also, in my opinion, very disjointed Periphery material. Some of it's cool. I mean, a lot of the instrumentals on here are awesome. Extraneous, which was the Nolly song, Nolly Get Good, Adam Nolly Get Good. Probably my favorite song on here. Just a really cool track. Zero was the Misha track, awesome. And then you get something like Parade of Ashes, which is the Spencer song. I really like that song. I think it's really cool. But then everything else here is just kind of like it's okay, I guess. I mean, I don't hate this record, but the Summer Jam, not really my jam, pun intended, I suppose. Which is the Jake Bowen song. Um, Mark Holcomb's Pale Aura is, I mean, I don't even remember what it sounds like in this moment. And then Feed the Ground, it's kind of cool, but it's not really like awesome. And then the overture is just an instrumental overture, and it's really pretty because it features piano a lot, but like otherwise it's just kind of whatever. This record, I guess you could call it a studio album, but I just don't. To me, it just kind of feels like an EP or something like that. uh, if it were part of the track, the whole album rundown listings, easily be last place. Like I said, I'm struggling to even remember what songs like Pale Aura and, I mean, the Summer Jam's kind of recognizable in my head, but Pale Aura, I've no fucking clue, honestly. I couldn't tell you what that song sounds like. It's not something I ever, if I want to listen to Periphery, this is the last thing I'll pick up. It's just not quite there. Not that it's bad music, but for me, it just kind of doesn't really do anything for me. And so that's why it kind of sits low in the whole view of Periphery. The other thing that is not a studio album, but it is in fact an EP, is of course the Icarus EP, the one that sort of like came out right as I was getting into the band. Um, Really cool EP. My hesitation with it is that obviously it's Icarus Lives EP, because Icarus Lives at the time was like their biggest track, and so they basically formulated a whole EP around it with some bonus songs as well. The remixes of all of Icarus Lives, I'm not really a big fan of any of them. None of them really like blow me away. Um, the Bulbous remix always felt like a meme to me, like it was just Misha memeing on Spencer's lyrics in the song. The Zed and Petty G remixes, again, it's one of those moments where I'm like, I don't really even know what's going on or why this was necessary. It's more music, which I'm never opposed to more music from a band I like, but it's also just kind of whatever. What is great on this record, though, is all the other stuff that's here. I mean, they open with New Groove, which New Groove is one of the coolest fucking instrumentals that Periphery has ever done. I wish that they would like have done more to New Groove. I wish New Groove wasn't like 2 minutes long. Instead, it was like 5 minutes long. Because talk about an amazing, insane groove. And also the way to open your EP with New Groove is like sick, beyond sick. Um, Frack the Gods at one time was my favorite Periphery track, believe it or not. And now, obviously, this is super early in their career, so they've completely outdone everything that was on this album. But then you get Jetpacks Was Yes and Icarus Lives, like re-recordings of those songs that were on Periphery 1. I want to save my thoughts on that until I get to Periphery 1 in the whole album lineup, but needless to say is that Icarus Lives is a very good song. Jetpacks Was Yes is a very good song, and I really like the version on this record. And then you finally get Captain On and Eureka in the back half of the EP. They're good songs. I don't hate them, but they're also not my favorite here. It's definitely that first half of New Groove, Frack, Jetpack, and Icarus. Like the main Icarus song is just like so killer, such a good version of all of those songs. And the beauty of the repressings that Periphery just released for all of these is that they're all colored vinyl, which if you watched my Contortionist sidebar, you know I love me some colored vinyl. I hate the whole black vinyl pressing. Here, we got a really nice black and blue splatter effect. It's cool. I think it's cool to have that as opposed to just doing the normal black, boring vinyl. So EP is cool, but it's an EP. And I don't think it's fair to say that this should be considered part of the ranking because it just quite doesn't add up to literally all their studio albums when there's just more material. And the focus of this was not to make tons and tons of new material. So those two I'm just going to talk about. Now we're going to get into the actual rankings of these albums. And I know I said that I wanted to save the whole Icarus and Jetpacks versions of the Icarus EP for when I talk about Periphery 1. But as this might upset some hardcore Periphery fans, Periphery 1 is actually my least favorite Periphery album. That's not to say it's bad. I do like this record a lot. There are moments on this record that I still listen to this day. I believe this came out in, of course, this is the repress, so it says 2023 on the back, but I'm pretty sure this came out in like 2011, maybe 2010, but definitely somewhere in that era. So this is like early ass Periphery, beginnings of Periphery. I mean, Mark and Nolly weren't even associated with the band at this point. And in spite of that, there's still some great tracks on here. I mean, The Walk is on here. Letter Experiment was also at one time my favorite Periphery song, although I think a lot of people just don't really care for that song, or rather, it's not like one of the more popular tracks. I love that song. I still love that song to this day. Um, Buttersnips. Buttersnips is a classic old Periphery song. Totla Mad, Ziggler Rocks, and of course Race Car on the back side of the final half, or final fourth, I should say, of this album. I mean, how can you say anything against Race Car? It's like their first epic they ever released, and it's amazing. But here's why this album is so low at the bottom for me. It really comes down to three things. The first is what I mentioned on the Icarus EP, is that on this album, you have Icarus Lives and you have Jetpacks Was Yes. But then Periphery just decides to make better versions of both the songs for the EP. And now all of a sudden, I don't want to listen to the versions of Icarus and Jetpacks that are on this record because they're not the good versions. They're the okay, whatever versions. I'd rather go to the Icarus EP for the versions that I would like to hear on this record. And so immediately, you just eliminated two good songs on this record that I would have otherwise listened to. So in that moment, this record starts to lose good songs because they're just better versions out there. The second is that some of the songs on here I don't think are very good at all. All My Feelings is probably my least favorite Periphery song ever. Like, even with like the clear stuff, like All My Feelings is such a like boring song. I don't think it has a single good moment in it. And it's sort of like not necessarily a blemish on their career, but you can see why a lot of this material they just don't play live anymore because they've just done better stuff. I mean, Insomnia's fine. Light, all new materials, they're fine. But in the case of all new materials, I think the only amazing part of that song is the guitar intro. After that, it sort of just loses its luster. So while this record has good tracks, it also has kind of just like bland Periphery tracks that I just don't really need to listen to ever again. If I go the rest of my Periphery career having not needing to listen to All My Feelings or Light again, I think I'd be okay. I don't need those songs anymore because they've done immensely better stuff since then. And the final reason that this album's just not quite it for me is that it sounds at times like it was produced in a tin can, which again, I understand they don't have tons of money to get like a perfect studio setup and have the best software and recording engineering stuff, but like it kind of just makes some of these listens difficult because it's not produced to greatness, and it's not also produced in a way that like makes it sort of charming. Hello Waits by Slayer, for example, is another really poorly produced record, but that kind of is the charm of it, that it's so poorly produced. If you're a Slayer fan and you know that album, you know what I'm talking about. But here, it doesn't quite make it charming. It just kind of makes it like, it's not super great. So overall, this is just not quite it for me. If I'm going to grab any Periphery studio album, this is not going to be the immediate one I grab. There are many other better ones here that I'm going to immediately go for. And you compare the performances on here to performances on later albums, and it's just like everybody across the board did better work than this album. So I still like this record a lot. I still think it's good, but I don't quite see it as something that I need to go find for every moment of my existence. Just to point out that, again, colored vinyl. I suppose I'll show all of them off because they're cool looking and I have them in person. Where one thing they did that I wasn't a huge fan of, here's the color, by the way, more of a light blue and white splatter. They apparently, I'm not a fan of this. This is something I think they should do, which is they repressed them and then also sold them in record stores. And I think the record store version of P1 is white with blue splatter as opposed to blue with white splatter. I think I would like that version more, but again, I bought all of them when they did their virtual store release, and they only repressed 500 of each album. Periphery, I don't know why. Like, I understand at that point it's like a collector's item and you have to get it before it goes. And lucky enough, I was able to get all of them. But like, do you know how much money you made in an hour by only selling 500 of Periphery 1 vinyl? Like, just do another 500. Like, as a person who owns this, I'm not going to be offended that you're repressing them beyond 500. Like, I'd rather have a lot of people have this in their collection than like get shunted and then, this is suddenly like $100 vinyl. I would be considered lucky if that's the case, because then I have it, and if I really need money, I can just sell it off. But like, I don't want to sell it off. That's the thing. I want it in my collection. I don't know. It was a very odd choice, but that's what they decided to do. So Periphery 1 is at the bottom of the totem pole for me. And funnily enough, we go from their first release to their latest release with my next option, or my next choice, Periphery 5. Now, again, this is the one I do not have on vinyl, so I'm not going to present anything right now. I'm just going to talk about it. I think from Periphery 1 to Periphery 5, it's like a quantum leap in quality. Like, you can just tell. Spencer sounds amazing. The whole band sounds amazing. They start adding like saxophones and orchestral elements to a lot of these songs, which they've done before, but like that saxophone solo in Wildfire is so goddamn good. And you don't hear any of that on Periphery 1. Now, the reason Periphery 5 is second to last is simply because I've had the least amount of time with it, as opposed to all these other records, which I've had for years. I've only had Periphery 5 for like almost a year at this point, and I just haven't had enough time with it to really say that it's better than the next couple albums I'm going to be talking about. Maybe a few months from now, a few years from now, with after numerous more listens, I'll be like, you know what, Periphery 5 is actually like one of their best. Right now, however, it's just kind of lower down for me. But that's not to say that it's bad. I mean, that opening trio of Wildfire, Atropos, and Wax Wings is like so good. And then you get Zagreus and Draculgras and like all these other great moments, heavy moments. Um, Silhouette is a little odd. They've been doing this a lot on their recent records, where they have like one song that's just straight clean and pretty and ethereal, and I'm not opposed to that per se, but like, if I had to axe one song, it would be Silhouette, and you'll see that trend continue with all the records that have that sort of same caveat to them. I still love Periphery 5, though. I think it's a great record. It was one of my favorite records from last year. It's just one that I haven't immersed myself in, like all these other ones I'm about to talk about, which I know them like the back of my hand. I've heard them so many times. So Periphery 5 has to go under the next couple records. And especially, I just don't see a world, for me at least, where Periphery 5 is better than Periphery 2. Periphery 2 is my next number ranking, whatever, right? Because Periphery 2, man, you had to be there when this thing came out. I distinctly remember being, again, a fan of Periphery when the Icarus EP came out. So all they had so far at this point was Periphery 1 and the Icarus EP. That's literally the entire catalog of their career. And then they announced they were making a new record. And at the time, they were like the most exciting band doing anything at the moment. And I was like, oh my God, this thing's going to be great. And then they released it early. I remember I was visiting Ohio, because that's where I used to live. And while I was visiting, they shadow dropped Periphery 2 and just like put it out on the internet for you to listen to. And I remember spending like 3 hours in my sister's apartment, because that was where I was staying and lodging while I was away at Ohio, just like listening to this album over and over again. And it was such a quantum leap in quality for me from P1 to P2. Like, I already loved Periphery, and then they released this goddamn thing, and it was like, okay, these guys are like unreal. Because at this point, you add Mark Holcomb and Adam Nolly Get Good into the band, and I mean, Adam in particular, his bass playing is just crazy, and Mark's really good too, don't get me wrong, but like, bro, this thing is so good. And you just start reading off some of these tracks, and it is such a nostalgia trip for me for a lot of this. I mean, you open with Muramasa, and you have the whole trio of Muramasa, Ragnarok, and Masamune, which is great. The sort of reprise of Somewhere in Time, We Welcome in the Fall, and all that. Yeah, right. You know, if you know Periphery, you know. But then after Muramasa, you get Have a Blast, which is such a good killer song by Periphery. Have a Blast is so goddamn good. Facepalm Mute. I love Facepalm Mute. Again, it's one of those songs that a lot of people just like don't talk about. I love that song. My least favorite track on Periphery 2 is G. J-I. I assume it's pronounced G. That's how I've been pronouncing it forever. It's just kind of forgettable. Again, it just doesn't really have that many exciting moments for me. Um, and I guess one track has to be the weakest track, so that would be the one I would pick from this album. Not Irased, which Irased is the one that has the sort of slower, ethereal, nice vocal pattern to it. I actually like Irased a lot. I don't mind that track at all. Epoch, it's nice, but it's not amazing. Anyway, I'm talking about the songs that are great on here. Scarlet. Scarlet is one of the few tracks from P1, P2 era that they still play live. They don't even play Make Total Destroy really anymore. And that's like my favorite song on this thing. That's like one of my favorite Periphery singles ever. Um, yeah, I mean, Mile Zero, Spencer's performance on Mile Zero is just incredible. Really, everything about this album is incredible. Even though I don't love G, I still think it's a pretty good track. Yeah, this thing, I adore this thing. So when I say that P5 is not going to be above P2, here's the gatefold if you're so interested. It's just one of those things that I would never put P5 over this. I'm sorry. I just could not do it because this is such a nostalgia trip for me. And I think it is great material throughout. But even saying that, it's not the top end. It's like the halfway point for a lot of Periphery's material. And just to point out, red and black are my favorite colors. So to have a red and black splatter vinyl, and then to have the 3 dots, the Periphery dots on there too. This is such a cool looking vinyl, and when it spins on the turntable, it looks amazing. Um, Definitely my favorite looking vinyl out of all of them, but not my favorite release of all the ones that I'm talking about here. Still, though, this was an incredible moment in time for me. One of my favorite musical experiences in my life was getting this, hearing it over and over again, and then going to see them live on the tour in which they were promoting P2. Such good memories, like early college memories for me. So I love P2. I think it's amazing. Um, I love that it exists. But even so, and you're about to see a trend here that my next record is, well, not their next record. It's not what came after P2, but it is number wise what came after P2, and that is P3. What's amazing about Periphery is that I think they've just gotten better and better with each subsequent record. Like I said, Spencer's voice on P5 is probably the best it's ever been. All the performances by the band members are the best they've ever been. So you'll see the trend of like the further in time we go, the more I love this band, which is probably an explanation as to why P5 might be like really high up a few years from now, because like you can't exactly shun the performances on P5. But my third favorite Periphery record is, in fact, Periphery 3. Because another moment in which they released this thing and you're like, there's no possible way they could do better than they did on P2 and Juggernaut. And like, oh my God, do they just do it better? I mean, opening with The Price Is Wrong, probably the best, well, I was about to say probably the best Periphery opener, but then I looked over at the other vinyls I'm talking about, and it's not. But it is one of the great Periphery openers. Motor Mouth is sick. Marigold, again, maybe their most popular song, if I had to guess. Although Wildfire probably might be their more popular, like mainstream song. At one time, though, Marigold was huge for the band, and I think people outside of Periphery fans knew that song somewhat. So many great moments on here. I mean, Remain Indoors. I love that song. Such a slow, like plodding song, but so good too. Um, Absalom, that bass groove at the beginning of Absalom, and then Catch Fire is a fun little ditty. I don't know. Loon as a closing track is awesome, great. And every song that I've also skimmed over is also really good. It's just like I'm not trying to talk about every single song on these records. But yeah, Periphery 3, I mean, they did such a good, again, gatefold here, the funny little face things. Here's the thing I'll say about these, though. I brought up in Metallica that Hardwired to Self-Destruct is one of the most disgusting looking album covers. I hate everything about it. These are kind of fun, though. It's kind of like a similar vibe, but, you know, it's not the album cover, thank God. Like, if this were the album cover, just the 6 of their faces like this, it'd be fucking stupid. But instead, they're like, hey, let's just add it in there and then have a really cool looking gold Periphery logo as the front cover. Smart choice, Periphery. Don't make stupid ass decisions like Metallica did with their record. I still love Hardwired to Self-Destruct, though. And then you get the yellow and black splatter with the infinity. I don't know if you can quite see it. I can't get too close to the camera, but that infinity logo on the center of the vinyl. The store release vinyls for Periphery 3 are just like a solid gold color. Damn, does it look good. Part of me kind of wishes that's the one I got, but again, I'm not mad of the versions I got when I got Periphery on vinyl. Like, I got all of them. So I'm just happy that's the case. Regardless, Periphery 3 is absolutely amazing, incredible work. I think to some people, perhaps the greatest moment in their career, but for me, not quite so. And I said earlier when I was talking about P3 that there was this part where I had to catch myself and say that Periphery's The Price is Wrong is like the best opener they ever did. That's not true. I had to correct myself because if you're a Periphery fan, you should know that Reptile exists. And Reptile is easily not only their best opener, there's a part of me that wants to say it's their best song, like in their entire catalog. The reason P4 is so high, and I do love P4, I love every moment on P4, but the reason P4 is literally this high, number 2, is largely because of two things, and that would be the opening track Reptile and the closing track Satellites. Maybe my number 1 and my number 2 favorite Periphery songs, respectively. I mean, God, Reptile is such a fucking killer song. And to open with a 15-minute track on your album, like, what a ballsy move that Periphery did. But my God, that like last 6 minutes of Reptile when it gets into the, like that, you know what I'm talking about if you know Periphery. That whole thing from the start of that to the end of that, which is roughly like a 6-minute thing. Oh my God, it's like one of the best things released in the last 10 years, just like musically, in any genre, anywhere. It is so goddamn good. And Spencer's performance and just how tight the band sounds and how it's literally like Meshuggah levels of like, it just is so tight. It's so in the pocket the whole time. And then you add Spencer's voice and what he's doing throughout the record on top of it. And it's, God, it's just so good. It's so goddamn good. And then after that, you get Blood Eagle, which you want to talk about great Periphery songs. The follow-up Reptile with Blood Eagle, like, talk about killer shit throughout this whole record. Church Burner, awesome song. Garden in the Bones, one of my favorite Spencer performances, and also just one of my favorite Periphery songs. It's Only Smiles is the sort of like silhouette moment, the Irised moment, the sort of clean vocal moment. It's fine. It's cool. I like it more than Silhouette. And it's not actually my least favorite song on this record. I do like it as a sort of clean Periphery moment. Follow Your Ghost is heavy as shit. I don't think that song gets enough credit for how cool it is. Crush is probably my least favorite Periphery song on this record. Not my favorite or least favorite Periphery song ever, but it's definitely my weakest moment on here. But it's still good. I don't skip it per se. It's just the one that if I had to choose one, that would be the one I would get rid of on the album. Sentient Glow is a fun sort of like, it's kind of thrashy. It feels like Avenged Sevenfold, like City of Evil era Avenged Sevenfold, very like fast and gallopy, but still cool, still great. And then you get Satellites, which might be my favorite Spencer performance ever. I mean, God, his approach and delivery on that song is so fucking good. Like, easily my favorite Periphery closer. And there's a lot of contention in that field. I mean, you have Loon, you have Masamune, you have a song we have yet to talk about yet because it's in my number 1 spot. But this is such a good record. If not for my number 1, this would easily be my number 1. And I remember when this came out as well. It's funny how I just like have memories associated with all these things. This came out around the time that one of my friends was getting married, and he's a huge Periphery fan. In fact, he's probably a bigger Periphery fan than I am. And I remember just like that whole trip, we were just listening to P4 on repeat because it's just so good. Everything about it. This is a sort of, it's not going to quite catch on the camera, but like, it's sort of like this gray dirt looking vinyl, which sounds gross, but it actually looks pretty cool in person. I really like what they did with the vinyl coloring on this one. P4 is number 2. It is not number 1, but it's still an amazing, amazing, amazing record. The first spot, the number 1 spot, actually goes to 2 records. And there's a reason why it goes to 2 records, because if you're a Periphery fan, you know that at one point they did this experimental thing, and these are studio albums, where they decided, okay, we could just release one record. We could just go with one record here with various stuff, but why don't we just do a double album and see how that goes? And they released Juggernaut, Alpha, and Omega. And I got to tell you, this was post P2. I'm pretty sure it was post Clear. So P2 comes out, and I am just adorned with it. I love it to death. Clear comes out, and I'm like, man, I really hope this is not the direction they take. So I actually wasn't super hyped about Juggernaut when it was announced. I'm going to put Omega down for a second and just hold up Alpha. I wasn't super hyped about this thing because I was like, man, it's just kind of like, if Clear is the direction this band is taking, I don't know. Like, I don't really care for it. And you can hear some Clear influence on Alpha, but it's like they cut all the fat out of Clear and just went with the stuff that actually worked, and then redesigned their like heavy sound and brought all that back in with, excuse me, brought all of that back in with it. Alpha and Omega as a collective grouping of a double album. And I do see them as one album just split into two parts. And so I'm going to take that from that direction. And if that's the case, if we're agreeing here that it's one album split into two parts, kind of like Lord of the Rings is one movie split into three parts, that's just what I believe, then this has to be my number one. For a number of reasons. One is, I think this is easily my most listened to Periphery record. I've probably heard Alpha and Omega like 200 times because I just love them so much. Two is that I admire the approach they took here, which was they did a double album. That already is enough. But then they added this whole conceptual idea to it. And to be fair, I still am not entirely sure what the concept is on this album and Omega. But there are moments and shades of moments in which I like get the concept and see what they're going for. I don't know it like the back of my hand though, like, you know, Metropolis 2 or Animals, for example, just like more famous concept albums. But you just got to talk about the music on this for a second. MK Ultra, which again is a short song. It's only 2 minutes and 50 seconds, but like it's so heavy. Just that like opening riff they do is so heavy, and I love everything about it. And I love the sort of sound of this time at Periphery's career. It has a very distinct, unique sound. It sounds like Periphery Juggernaut era. And I just really like that era of their career and the way they sounded back then. The Scourge. God, the Scourge was so good, and I love the way the Scourge goes about. Alpha, yes, it is very poppy. It is very bright. It's not super heavy Periphery, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. In fact, it's sort of great, in my view, that this album, Alpha, is more of the like lighter version, and then we're about to talk to Omega, which is definitely like the darker half of the record. So light half, dark half. 22 Faces, Rainbow Gravity, Four Lights, all great. But then, as a closing track, you get Psychosphere, which I said Satellites is my favorite Periphery closer, and it is, but like, man, Psychosphere, I love that song. Easily one of my top 5 Periphery songs at this point. I just love it to death. I love the sound of it. I love the groove of it. The whole boom, 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 just like the whole sluggish maneuver of it. It feels huge and it feels slow. Like it's this giant Goliath juggernaut thing that's just like slowly coming at you, and there's nothing you can do. You could try and run, but eventually it's going to get you. And you could try and fight it, but you're going to stand no shot at beating it. It's really great. If I did have to separate these two albums, like if you say, well, that's not fair that there are two albums being counted as one. Also, here's the vinyl, red and white. If you're saying that it's not fair to say that, you know, Alpha and Omega together make one and you have to separate them, this would definitely be below P4 for me. I think that at the end of the day, I would take P4 over Alpha specifically. But again, this is my ranking, and I'm going to count them as one because it is a double album. Now, when it comes to Omega, though, even if you said you have to separate them, I think Omega just takes the top spot for me. Probably, well, on Periphery 5, they have some very, very, very heavy moments. But man, the heavy moments on this record are so fucking heavy. It's like planets colliding. One of my favorite phrases. It's literally like planetary devastation on this record. You get the Bad Thing. How can you not like the Bad Thing? Like, oh, it's such a good song. I wish they played it live, like at every concert they did. Such a good Periphery track. Priestess, a very pretty sort of song, but like, I love it. I love that song. I think it's beautiful. I think it's lovely because you get the heavy with Bad Thing, you get the pretty with Priestess, and then you get right back to the heavy with Graveless, and it's like, God, these songs are so heavy at this point. Then you get the Hell Below, which is probably like their heaviest song ever, although everything is fine. The end of that song really gives it a run for its money. But God, Hell Below literally sounds like you're just like plummeting into hell and like getting crushed by the weight of sin or some biblical shit that I just don't even know how to comprehend. Love it so much. So good. Then you get Omega, which is the epic of Alpha and Omega. It's 12 minutes, roughly 12 minutes in length. Amazing. Love it to death. But then you get Stranger Things, which if I'm not mistaken, is one of my friend's favorite Periphery songs. And again, another amazing closer by this band. It's phenomenal. Even though just by itself, this record is only like, I want to say like 40 minutes long, maybe 45, maybe 35. The amount of stuff they do in that time frame and do well in that time frame is sort of staggering. Um, and P4 and P3 and all those records I already mentioned are great records. But for me, Omega and Alpha together, just at a time period of my fandom of Periphery, I don't think I was more like into Periphery, more desiring them just making music immediately, and I want it now. I want more of this. I think I saw them in concert during Juggernaut, like the tour they did for Juggernaut. I don't quite remember who was with it. I know I saw P2 and I know I saw P3 and P1. I never saw them during P4 or P5, unfortunately, because with P5 they decided to just do like a European tour in like 5 state cities, which is stupid. But I digress. I'm pretty positive I saw them on this tour, and again, I just look back on Periphery's Alpha and Omega era, Juggernaut era, and I was just like the biggest fan of the band. They were my favorite band at that point. They could do no wrong. And it's not to say that when P3 came out, I suddenly like hated the band and they were no longer like good to me. I just sort of started listening to other things. I still love Periphery at that point. I still love them now. But like this era of specifically these 2 records is just like the thing for me. The era of like the greatest remembrance of this band and my greatest time with this band. And there's no way it couldn't be number 1. And again, I see it as one record. Just so Juggernaut itself is what is number 1, not necessarily Alpha and Omega. It's just Periphery's Juggernaut, which happens to be Alpha and Omega. And here is the Omega coloring, really cool green with a black splatter. Just awesome, very cool. So yeah, that's how I feel about Periphery's records and my personal rankings of each. I love the band. I can't wait for P6 if they continue the trend of just naming records after numbers. I don't know if they'll ever do another Juggernaut moment where it's not P blank, it's like this concept thing. I've heard rumors that they've talked about doing a Juggernaut 2 type thing, like a sequel to Juggernaut or something similar to it. I would love that just because Juggernaut's my favorite, and I think it would be cool to sort of like revisit that style and revisit that sort of experimentation that they were doing. And then after that, maybe it fails, maybe it doesn't work. Do P6, do P7, but like maybe we can have a moment where we just like sort of reconnect with that sort of experimental concept phase we did with Juggernaut, because I think it'd be pretty cool. I think it'd be a worthwhile thing to experience. As always, though, if you have not heard these records or don't know Periphery, I implore you to try. It is heavy music. There's a lot of growling vocals. If you don't like that, you probably won't like it. But hey, Spencer Sotelo as a vocalist is phenomenal. His clean vocals are staggering at times. His high notes are insane a lot of the times he does them. So it's something worth looking into. At least you could try. But yeah, I'm a huge Periphery fan, so that's my thoughts. That's my feelings. I just wanted to throw something out there for people to listen to while we get prepared for the next episode. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later, but do rest assured there is more Album Fight Club coming. There is more matchups coming. Cody and I are very excited for more discussions of that. But for now, thank you for still listening to us. You don't have to at all. You could easily spend your time doing something else. But we're very humbled. I speak for both Cody and I when we say that we're very humbled that people actually listen to us talk about music. We're just 2 friends who like music and we like talking about it. So it's cool that people can also share that with us. So yeah, ranting done, Periphery talk done. Hope to have P5 on vinyl and then my collection will be truly complete. But for now, I have what I have and I'm very grateful for what I have. And hopefully you're a Periphery fan as well. And hopefully you have a great evening, day, whatever it might be. And see you on the next Album Fight Club. Take care.